An alarm wailed through the claustrophobic corridors of the slave ship, echoing like a banshee's shriek in the darkness. Smoke curled against the walls, pooling into ominous gray clouds that obscured vision and choked the lungs. Sparks rained from overhead light fixtures, casting momentary flashes of brilliance that revealed battered metal bulkheads, broken cables, and twisted steel. In the midst of this chaos, a lone figure sprinted, his breath short yet determined, his steps pounding out in urgent rhythm on the trembling deck. His name was Ethan, a human drifter who had found himself caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. He had been traveling on a modest freighter, attempting to eke out a living by ferrying goods between fringe colonies in the outer quadrants. Fortune had never blessed him with wealth nor led him down the smooth path to comfort. Instead, it had guided him here, into an inexplicable nightmare. One moment, he had been scanning the horizon from the cockpit of his ship, humming a tune to keep himself company. The next, a fiery explosion had rocked his vessel, sending him crashing into the slave ship's docking bay. Now, the corridors quaked under repeated detonations, as an unknown force bombarded the behemoth from outside. Ethan's lungs burned, and his eyes watered from the acrid fumes. Yet he continued forward, throwing himself around corners and through twisting hallways, guided by a frantic pulse in his chest. Panic threatened to seize him, but adrenaline kept him focused. He knew that his only chance for survival lay in finding an escape pod, or at least a hangar, before the entire ship broke apart in a cataclysmic blast. Suddenly, a metal door buckled in the bulkhead to his left, the hinges screeching in protest. Through a gap in the torn plating, an otherworldly glow caught his eye, a faint luminescence, like the blue shimmer of a moonlit sea. Something about that gentle radiance stirred curiosity in Ethan's heart, compelling him to approach. He pried open the damaged door, ignoring the shards of steel that cut into his gloves. The chamber beyond was dimly lit, a single flickering lamp at its center. Along the walls were rows of cages, each containing a prisoner of varying species. Shackles bound them, heavy manacles attached to ankles and wrists, as though their captors wished them never to see the light of freedom again. Among these cages lay a single figure that seized Ethan's gaze, a woman, slender and regal, with sapphire skin that seemed to glow faintly despite her haggard state. Her hair, a cascade of silvery threads, fell in disarray across her face. A pair of delicate horns curved back from her forehead, their ridges etched with faint patterns. She wore tattered remnants of what might have once been a garment of fine cloth, but now it was little more than rags. Her large, luminescent eyes revealed both exhaustion and fierce resolve. Ethan's chest tightened. He had never encountered an alien of her particular species. Though the galaxy was teeming with countless races, the sense of silent nobility about her was unmistakable. Even battered and caged, she maintained a regal bearing, refusing to let despair overpower her. Approaching cautiously, Ethan reached for the laser cutters strapped to his belt. He had salvaged them from a wrecked maintenance cart. The woman, sensing his approach, lifted her gaze, revealing eyes that glowed with a strange inner fire. Their gazes locked. Though they did not share a common language, there was a mutual understanding in that electric moment. They were both trapped, both determined to escape. Without words, he activated the laser cutters, slicing away the manacles that bound her wrists. When he reached for the shackles on her ankles, the subtle tremor of the ship's hull intensified, rattling them both. Smoke filled the room, and a secondary explosion rocked the overhead lighting, plunging the chamber into near darkness. Only the woman's sapphire glow offered any illumination. In that surreal twilight, Ethan freed her final shackle. She stood unsteadily, leaning against him for balance. For a single heartbeat, he feared she might collapse. But her alien physiology prevailed, and she took a step forward, meeting his gaze with cautious gratitude. No more time remained for introductions. Another explosion reverberated through the corridor. The overhead vents belched hot smoke, and the floor beneath them shuddered with ominous rumblings. Ethan gestured for her to follow. Together, they began their desperate flight through the labyrinth of corridors, dodging collapsed walls, scattering wires, and fires that burned in swirling patches. All the while, muffled screams echoed from unseen captives or fleeing guards. The woman's breath was ragged, Yet she kept pace with Ethan, her resolve clearly unwavering. They reached a hatch leading to the hangar bay. He forced it open with the failing remnants of the ship's manual override system. Beyond lay a wide, open space littered with twisted steel containers, broken cargo loaders, and a scattering of smaller ships pinned beneath collapsed support beams. In the far corner, half hidden by a fallen crane, sat a battered but seemingly intact shuttle pod, just large enough to carry 2 passengers, possibly 3. For them, it was hope incarnate. But as they hurried forward, shapes materialized from the swirling haze. Guards wearing heavy armor and carrying plasma rifles. They shouted commands lost in the roaring chaos. Laser bolts sliced through the smoke, their red brilliance lighting the murk with sudden, lethal intensity. Ethan grabbed the alien woman's hand, pulling her behind a fallen cargo loader. Sparks rained against their makeshift cover, scorching the metal and filling the air with the scent of ozone. He glanced at her, swallowing hard. She nodded, her eyes fixed on him with an uncanny clarity. Ethan braced himself, took a breath, and leaped from behind the loader. His worn blaster pistol spat orange beams of return fire. The guards staggered, ill-prepared for resistance. They wavered, uncertain, but did not flee. Their own blast struck the ground near Ethan's feet, forcing him to roll aside to avoid searing plasma. In a moment of serendipity, the battered crane above them groaned, giving way under the strain of repeated hits. It toppled with a thunderous crash. The guards scattered, retreating in disarray to avoid being crushed by the falling metal. Ethan took advantage of the confusion, motioning the woman to run with him. She darted behind him, her limber form surprisingly swift even in her weakened state. They reached the shuttle pod, its hull painted a dull gray with battered edges and scorch marks. Not exactly the ideal vessel for a clean getaway, yet it was their only chance. Ethan hammered the emergency open switch, thankful it still responded. The door slid open with a jagged whine. He helped the alien woman inside first, then scrambled after her. The cockpit was cramped, dominated by a console of flickering lights and half-broken readouts. With no time to puzzle over every malfunctioning indicator, Ethan engaged the startup sequence, praying the ancient relic still possessed enough power to break free from the doomed ship. The engines sputtered, coughed, and finally roared to life in a cloud of blue-white exhaust. Behind them, the hangar doors were partially sealed, but an emergency override from the console forced them to open. Air whooshed out, carrying smoke and debris into the cold expanse of space. Ethan guided the pod forward, weaving between floating wreckage. Overhead, the slave ship continued to shake under the relentless barrage of unknown attackers. Fire blossomed from breaches in the hull. If they delayed a moment longer, they would be sealed in a metallic tomb. With a final push on the thrusters, the shuttle punched through the flickering energy field that had once safeguarded the hangar from vacuum. They were free, adrift in the glittering black, surrounded by the pinpricks of distant stars. Behind them, the slave ship glowed with the fiery illumination of internal explosions. A far-off cruiser, bathed in menacing silver, hammered it with blasts from mounted plasma cannons, finishing the job. Ethan marveled that, despite his ordeal, he had somehow survived. He glanced to the alien woman beside him, her sapphire skin shining in the pale glow of the console's controls. He did not yet know her name, nor her story. But he did know this. She was free now, and so was he. Little did they both suspect that in this desperate escape lay the first threads of a cosmic conspiracy, one that would throw them headlong into unimaginable peril, test their loyalty, and forever intertwine their fates. Chapter 2. First Words and Unsteady Bonds. With the battered shuttle pod drifting through the void, Ethan exhaled, releasing tension he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The console beeped erratically as it struggled to maintain stable life support. He pushed a few buttons to reroute power from non-essential systems to the environmental controls. At last, the temperature began to normalize. The alien woman turned to face him, her luminous eyes filled with gratitude and uncertainty. Her lips parted, but she spoke in a language Ethan had never heard, soft and melodic, each syllable rolling like a gentle breeze. He tried to glean meaning, but the words were entirely foreign. His own halting attempts at interstellar trade tongues produced only a confused tilt of her head, though he did catch a fleeting recognition when he mentioned the word Nyra. He repeated it, pointing at her. She blinked, then nodded, placing a hand on her chest. Thus, he learned her name, Nyra. Though his curiosity ran deep, there was no immediate way for them to communicate more than the barest hints. He resolved that, once they reached a safe harbor, they would find a universal translator or at least a comprehensive language database. For now, the urgent matter was survival. Glancing at the navigation readouts, Ethan groaned. Most of the sensors were offline, and the star charts were incomplete. They would have to rely on the simpler, more ancient principle of triangulation, scanning for signals of known star bases or planetary outposts. Static hissed through the comm, a reminder that the vessel's communications system was damaged, possibly jammed. He fiddled with the controls, occasionally catching scrambled transmissions that hinted at ongoing battles or distant cosmic interference. All around, the vast emptiness offered silence, punctuated only by the hum of the pod's engines and the crackling of failing circuits. Exhausted, Ethan allowed himself a moment to observe Nyra more closely. Her posture was regal, even in her battered condition. The sapphire hue of her skin glimmered under the cockpit's lights, her horns adorned with faint, intricate lines, possibly some natural design or cultural insignia. She appeared physically fragile, yet radiated an aura of inner strength. A pang of sympathy struck him as he noticed the bruises on her wrists and ankles, a testament to the harsh captivity she had endured. He wished he could speak, to reassure her that she was safe, at least for the time being. Nyra returned his gaze, the corners of her lips twitching in what might have been a cautious smile. She reached out, gently touching his forearm. Though they lacked words, the gesture spoke volumes: gratitude, kinship, and perhaps even a cautious trust. Ethan nodded, determined to ensure her safety, and, in doing so, preserve his own. The shuttle rattled abruptly as it passed near a debris field, possibly remnants of the destroyed slave ship or other ill-fated vessels. Alarm lights flashed, warning that the hull was not fully sealed in certain sections. They would need to find a place to land or dock soon, or risk suffocating in the void. Sighing, Ethan set the autopilot on a slow drift and rummaged through the compartment behind the cockpit. He hoped to find a survival kit, rations, water, medical supplies, anything. Fortune favored him slightly. Behind a panel, he discovered a compact emergency box labeled with faded text. Opening it, he was relieved to find protein packs, water purifiers, a modest medical kit with bandages, and a universal translator device in need of new power cells. With trembling hands, he replaced the device's worn-out battery from the kit. The translator blinked, beeped, and died. Apparently, the battery was also compromised. Undeterred, Ethan cursed softly and tried a different approach, patching the device into the shuttle's limited power grid via cable. This time, a flickering holographic screen appeared, awaiting language input. He handed the translator to Nyra with an awkward smile. She stared at the device warily, then gingerly tapped the console. Her melodic voice filled the cockpit again, this time captured by the translator's sensors. The holographic display blinked furiously, analyzing the phonetics. After a few tense moments, a mechanical voice emerged, stuttering at first. "Greetings. Name: Nyra. Thank you for saving me." Ethan's eyes widened with relief. Though imperfect, it was progress. He managed a trembling laugh, thankful to finally bridge the language gap. Leaning forward, he spoke into the translator. "I'm Ethan. Are you hurt?" Nyra watched the device's screen flicker again before it produced a halting approximation of his words in her language. She responded, and the mechanical voice followed. "I am tired, but I live. My injuries are not too severe. Thank you." Her voice sounded distant, distorted by the translator, but that did not diminish the sincerity in her tone. Over the next few minutes, they took turns speaking into the device, forging a makeshift understanding. Nyra explained, haltingly, that she had been taken captive by slavers who preyed upon the fringes of the galaxy. She had been betrayed by her own kin, sold to these mercenaries for reasons she had yet to fully comprehend. As soon as the conversation delved deeper, though, the translator sputtered with confusion, lacking the necessary data to interpret complex alien terms or references. Even so, Ethan gleaned enough. Her captivity was no accident. and whoever orchestrated it must have powerful connections across multiple star systems. For the moment, they focused on the basics. Ethan showed her the emergency rations, offering her a share. She nodded gratefully, swallowing them with the dignified air of someone who had known far better meals, yet was too thankful to complain. As the minutes slipped by, their initial awkwardness gave way to a growing camaraderie. "Where are we going?" Nyra asked at length, her voice shaky through the translator. "Anywhere we can find safety," Ethan replied, scanning the scattered star maps. "I'll try to plot a course to the nearest known outpost. After that, we'll see if we can learn who wanted you captured and why." Nyra's sapphire features darkened, reflecting apprehension. "Be careful, my people. Some of them are not what they seem." Ethan studied her, waiting for her to elaborate, but she merely closed her eyes, a troubled expression crossing her face. A faint spark of fear flickered behind her weary facade. Respecting her boundaries, he turned his attention back to the console, determined to find a route to safety. Shortly thereafter, the battered shuttle scanner detected a faint beacon from a remote trading station orbiting an icy dwarf planet. The station, designated Bracken's Rest, appeared to be a hodgepodge of modules welded together, a place where smugglers, desperate travelers, and fortune-seekers gathered. The chance of landing unbothered by local gangs was low, but it was better than drifting aimlessly in space. "Hang on," Ethan murmured, keying in the approach vector. "We'll have to hope these folks are more interested in trade than collecting bounties on escaped slaves." Nyra nodded, her expression resolute. Outside the cockpit's window, the stars shifted subtly as the pod angled toward the station's beacon. Neither of them realized that their fates had already been sealed the moment Ethan pried open her cage. Powerful forces were at play across the galaxy, powers that would soon hunt them both for their knowledge, and more urgently, for the price upon Nyra's head. Chapter 3. Bracken's Rest. Bracken's Rest was an unsightly marvel against the velvet backdrop of space. Its patchwork hull looked like a compilation of discarded parts, some modules scorched by plasma blasts, others adorned with neon signage and languages that flickered uncertainly. The docking bay was housed within a rounded sector that jutted out from the station's main ring, sealed by ancient airlocks and guarded by bored-looking attendants. Ethan guided the shuttle inside, carefully navigating past derelict cargo haulers and battered passenger shuttles. After the pressurization cycle, a robotic voice welcomed them with bland enthusiasm. "Welcome to Bracken's Rest. Station fees apply. Please submit docking credentials or payment." With a grimace, Ethan rummaged through his pockets for the last of his digital credits. He wasn't sure if the station's system accepted the same currency, but there was no alternative. He tapped the console, transferring the meager sum. A second later, the bay doors groaned open, granting them access. When he and Nyra emerged onto the dock, they were met with a cacophony of smells and sights. Oil, acrid fumes, the distant hum of chatter, the shuffle of boots on metal walkways. Clusters of individuals from every corner of the galaxy hurried about, traders wearing stained jumpsuits, mercenaries clad in imposing armor, and a few shady figures who lurked in the corners, eyes gleaming beneath hooded cloaks. Nyra's sapphire skin drew stares almost instantly. Concerned about attracting attention, Ethan quickly shrugged off his old jacket, draping it around her shoulders to conceal her more striking features. The translator device was tucked inside the jacket as well, letting them communicate without brandishing obvious technology. Despite these precautions, there was little chance they would go unnoticed. They soon located a small shop near the outer edge of the dock, a junk dealer's repository of spare parts, secondhand gear, and outdated star charts. The shop smelled of ozone and stale sweat. Its proprietor, a gaunt, four-armed alien with bulging yellow eyes, clicked his mandibles in greeting. "What can I do for you, friend?" he asked in Galactic Common, studying Ethan with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Ethan spoke in hushed tones. "Need to fix a translator and maybe buy some updated star charts. Also, looking for information on any bounties posted recently." At the mention of bounties, the alien's posture shifted, a slight stiffening that betrayed heightened interest. "You're not a hunter, are you?" "Just looking to keep my head low," Ethan replied, offering a non-committal shrug. "I need to know who might be after me." The shopkeeper's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. "Information has a price." They haggled for what felt like an eternity. Credits changed hands, nearly all of what Ethan had left. When the dust settled, the translator was repaired, updated star charts loaded, and the shopkeeper provided a small data chip containing the latest bounty listings. "Don't say I never did anything for you," the shopkeeper hissed, leaning forward conspiratorially. "You look like the type to find trouble. Just be careful. Heard rumors that the council's been paying well for special captures." Ethan nodded, forcing a tight smile. He gestured for Nyra to follow him out. Once outside, they ducked behind a stack of crates to examine the data chip. The translator, now more finely calibrated, allowed them to communicate softly and fluently. "This station might be crawling with bounty hunters," Ethan muttered, scanning the data. "If you're wanted by someone powerful, we're both in danger." Nyra nodded, her face grim. "I sense eyes on us. My people's betrayal is not small. They want me back, for reasons I do not yet fully understand." Ethan studied her, trying to gauge the fear beneath her calm exterior. "We'll keep a low profile, resupply, and get out. Then we'll figure out what to do next." With that plan in mind, they made their way through narrow corridors that reeked of stale air. Occasional flickers from overhead lights cast ominous shadows. They found a dingy hostel that offered short-term lodging, paying a handful of credits for a cramped room on the upper level. The walls were thin, the bedding minimal, but it was at least private enough for a night's rest. Once the door sealed behind them, they both collapsed into weary silence. Days of stress, captivity, and near-death experiences weighed on their shoulders. For a moment, they simply breathed, listening to the muffled clamor from the corridor beyond. Ethan activated the translator, meeting Nyra's gaze. "Tell me more about your people. Why would they sell you to slavers?" Nyra's luminous eyes flickered with sorrow. She settled on the edge of the bed, her posture tense. "I am from the planet Sirith, in the Lyrian Belt, known for my race's unique talents in energy manipulation. We can absorb and redirect certain types of cosmic energy, a skill that has long intrigued outsiders." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Some on Sirith believe we should share our gifts with the rest of the galaxy. Others, especially our ruling council, keep these abilities secret. They forbid any contact with outsiders, ensuring that Sirith remains shrouded from prying eyes. I was part of a faction that disagreed. We thought we could help heal dying worlds, build star bridges, and contribute in meaningful ways to galactic society. But the council saw that as treason." Ethan exhaled softly. "So they gave you up to protect their secret?" Tears glistened in Nyra's eyes, though none spilled down her cheeks. "Not officially. Their policy is isolation at all costs. Yet there are some among them who have grown corrupted, using our energy skills for personal profit. They formed a secret pact with slavers, dealing in living weapons or valuable resources, my people. I refused to cooperate, so they arranged my capture." A hard lump grew in Ethan's throat. He shook his head in disgust. "That's monstrous. No wonder you fled." Nyra nodded. Her gaze lowered, the tip of her horns trembling slightly. "I have nowhere to go. Even if I returned to Sirith, the council would brand me a traitor. My own family may have turned against me. But if I stay out here, I am a fugitive with no allies." Silence prevailed for a few moments, broken only by the hum of the station's ventilation. Ethan felt an unexpected surge of protectiveness. He barely knew Nyra, yet the injustice of her plight roused a fierce determination in him. Perhaps it was the memory of his own life's hardships, constantly drifting, unloved by any cause or clan, that resonated with her loneliness. "We'll figure this out," he said gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. "For now, let's rest. Tomorrow, we'll see if anyone else on Bracken's Rest can help us. We're in this together." Nyra offered a faint smile, covering his hand with hers. "Thank you, Ethan. Your kindness humbles me." With that unspoken bond, they settled in for the night. Exhaustion claimed them both, though neither found much peace. Outside the thin walls of their rented room, the station's nightlife buzzed with clandestine deals, rowdy fights, and drunken laughter. And above all, the cosmic darkness beyond the hull seemed to whisper with the unseen presence of adversaries who would stop at nothing to capture Nyra or destroy them both. Chapter 4. Ambushed and Uncovered Secrets. The next day, they ventured out early into the station's labyrinth of corridors, aiming to avoid the busier, more dangerous crowds that emerged at nightfall. Ethan clutched a small note containing directions to a data broker rumored to deal in hidden records and black market intelligence. With Nyra by his side, they wove through narrow walkways illuminated by sputtering neon and the occasional flash of an exposed wire. Their destination was a cramped office located behind a row of malfunctioning hollow ads for questionable pharmaceuticals. A leaky pipe overhead trickled murky fluid, forming puddles on the corroded floor. Nyra wrinkled her nose at the pungent stench, while Ethan knocked on the battered metal door. After a tense silence, a small panel slid open at eye level. A single reptilian eye peered out, flickering with suspicion. "What do you want?" it hissed. "Information," Ethan replied, brandishing a handful of credit chips. "On high-profile bounties, slaver routes, and any recent shipments from Sirith." Another pause, then the door hissed open. They were greeted by a dark, cramped interior lined with servers that hummed under flickering lights. The occupant was a reptilian humanoid with mottled green scales, wearing a stained lab coat. He introduced himself as Skill, speaking in quick, clipped tones. Leading them to a workstation, he began tapping commands into a console. "You pay first," Skill said, casting an expectant glance at the credit chips. Ethan obliged, sliding them across the sticky surface of a rusted table. Skill counted them greedily, his forked tongue flicking the air. Satisfied, he inserted a data rod into the console, pulling up lists of transmissions, black market logs, and partial shipping manifests stolen from unscrupulous freighters. The holographic display filled the cramped room with swirling lines of text. "Slaver routes operating near the Lyrian belt," Skill muttered, his clawed fingers dancing over the keypad. "Looks like some shipments might be going to a private facility in the Varus sector. Payment from an unnamed source, but large amounts. Could be council money, or maybe a faction within your planet's ruling body." Nyra's breathing quickened, her glowing eyes scanning the data. "This facility in Varus. Could it be the place they intended to send me?" Skill shrugged, unimpressed by her sapphire appearance. "I only see the shipping logs. You want more? I charge more. But be warned. If this is the council, you're dealing with serious power. They don't like meddlers." Ethan leaned forward. "We need enough information to expose them, or at least figure out how to turn the tables. And we need it quietly." Skill snorted. "Quiet? On Bracken's Rest? You'd be better off selling your souls. But if you're set on it, I'll see what I can do." He tapped another command, causing a new set of data to flash on the screen. "High-value bounty, one posted just a few cycles ago. The description, female, blue skin, unique energy signature. That's her, isn't it?" Nyra stiffened. A lump formed in Ethan's throat. The bounty was staggering, enough credits to buy a small moon. The listing's sponsor was labeled confidential, but the notes hinted at official channels in the Galactic Council. Beneath that, a subsidiary posting from a group identifying themselves as Sirith's High Circle. Ethan glanced at Nyra, whose sapphire hue dimmed with anxiety. She must have felt that wave of betrayal anew, seeing her own ruling council not only complicit in her capture, but publicly endorsing her recapture. They wanted her alive, but condition inconsequential. The meaning was clear. They did not care if she suffered in captivity. Skill pressed a button, turning off the display. "You have your intel. Now leave. I can't risk my own neck." Without argument, Ethan nodded and led Nyra into the hallway. The door slammed shut behind them. They stood for a moment in tense silence, the flickering neon reflecting in the puddles at their feet. Nyra's voice emerged from the translator in a trembling tone. "My life is a commodity. No matter where I go, they will chase me." Ethan exhaled, eyes scanning the corridor for eavesdroppers. "Then we keep moving. But now we know there's a facility in the Varus sector where they might be taking others like you. If we can find proof, maybe transmissions, research logs, or even survivors, that might be enough to shine a light on all their dirty dealings." Nyra looked uncertain. "Ethan, how can we possibly fight them?" He offered a grim half-smile. "We won't, not directly. We gather evidence, link it to high-ranking members of the Galactic Council, and we blow the lid on this entire operation. But we have to do it smart, or they'll silence us before we get the chance." She nodded slowly, her eyes glinting with a renewed spark of determination. "I refuse to return to a cage. If we must risk everything, so be it." They made their way back toward the docking bay, weaving between busy merchants and suspicious strangers. Unbeknownst to them, a trio of heavily armed figures were shadowing them from a distance. The moment Ethan and Nyra passed by a dimly lit corridor, the figures rushed forward, weapons raised. "Stop!" barked a gravelly voice. "Hands where we can see them." Ethan spun, adrenaline surging. 3 bounty hunters brandished blasters. The tallest, a scarred man with a cybernetic eye, stepped forward, sneering. "You're both coming with us. Got a nice payday on that blue lady." Nyra tensed, glancing about for an escape route. The corridor behind them was sealed, and to their right lay the exit to the main docking area, crowded with onlookers who quickly scattered at the sight of drawn weapons. Ethan steadied his posture, voice low. "Let's talk about this." The scarred bounty hunter smirked. "Oh, we'll talk all right. After we collect the reward." He lifted his blaster. "Hand her over, or I'll shoot you where you stand." Before Ethan could react, Nyra extended her hands, eyes narrowed with fierce concentration. A shimmering wave of energy emanated from her palms, colliding with the 3 assailants. The corridor filled with a static charge that lifted every hair on Ethan's body. The bounty hunters cried out, staggering as arcs of vibrant light danced across their armor. When the crackling subsided, they collapsed to their knees, stunned but alive. Breath hitching, Nyra lowered her arms, her glowing skin pulsing with residual energy. Ethan stared, momentarily awestruck. He had heard her speak of her people's talents, but witnessing it was another matter. She had controlled the ambient energy around them, harnessing it into a non-lethal force that disabled the hunters. The toll on her was evident, though. She wavered, gasping for breath, her complexion paling momentarily. Ethan lunged forward, helping her maintain balance. Around them, the station's denizens and passers-by retreated further, wary of crossing an individual with such power. Alarms began to blare from overhead security sensors. "We've got to move," Ethan hissed, guiding Nyra toward the docking bay. She mustered a nod, forcing her trembling legs to move. Together, they raced into the main thoroughfare, weaving through startled crowds. The station's security, a ragtag group of poorly equipped guards, scrambled in confusion, uncertain whether to detain them or the stunned bounty hunters. Reaching the docking bay door, Ethan punched in his code. The battered shuttle awaited them, sitting like a dented can in the midst of more impressive vessels. With trembling haste, they boarded. The engines powered up, whining in protest. Over the intercom, a flat voice demanded that they remain on station until an investigation could be conducted. Ethan ignored it, slamming a lever forward to release the docking clamps. "No going back now," he muttered, mind whirling with the revelation of Nyra's powers. The bay doors jerked open, releasing them into the cold void of space. Beyond Bracken's Rest, the stars seemed strangely serene, a stark contrast to the violence they had just escaped. As they navigated away from the station, Ethan cast one last glance at the flickering lights of that hodgepodge outpost. He knew, without a doubt, that the bounty hunters would not be the last to come for them. The galaxy was vast, and their enemies innumerable. But they had a lead, the clandestine facility in the Varus sector. If they could reach it, and if they could uncover tangible proof of the Council's involvement in the trafficking of Nyra's people, they might stand a chance. Together, they soared into the blackness, forging a path of uncertainty, danger, and a faint glimmer of hope. Chapter 5. The Long Path to Varus. Their journey to the Varus sector was fraught with anxiety and exhaustion. The battered shuttle's engines sputtered intermittently, forcing Ethan to make frequent recalibrations. Nyra, meanwhile, rested in the narrow, sleeping alcove, trying to regain her strength. Whenever he glanced her way, Ethan was struck by a mix of concern and admiration. For all her quiet grace, she harbored formidable power. He wondered if she had truly grasped the magnitude of what she could do. Laid into what might pass for night, on board the shuttle, Ethan's console beeped, alerting him to an incoming signal. He leaned forward, brow furrowed. The signal was weak, riddled with static, but it carried a recognizable identification code. It was from an old contact of Ethan's, a smuggler named Orlo, who roamed the galaxy in search of profitable ventures. Ethan had once transported goods for him, forging a tenuous friendship. Curious, Ethan opened a communications channel. The screen flickered, revealing Orlo's features: short, stocky, with a face weathered by too many cosmic storms. His voice crackled through the speakers. Ethan? Thought you were space dust by now. What's this I hear about you messing with council business? Ethan glanced over his shoulder to ensure Nyra was still asleep. Long story, Orlo. Let's just say I have a passenger who's attracted a lot of unwanted attention. Passenger, huh? Orlo raised a brow. Word on the wave is there's a big bounty posted for a blue-skinned female fugitive. That wouldn't happen to be. Ethan clenched his jaw. I'm not turning her in, if that's what you're implying. Orlo made a show of shrugging. Never said you should. But you're playing a dangerous game. Look, I owe you one from way back. Let me give you a warning. The council's got eyes everywhere. They're not shy about hiring every merc in the quadrant. But I might know a thing or two about that facility in Varus. Heard rumors it's a top-secret research installation, heavily guarded, nestled near an asteroid belt. People who go snooping around either don't come back or come back in body bags. Ethan's heart hammered in his chest. Any advice on how to get in? Orlo let out a bleak chuckle. I'd say don't. But if you're determined, there's a subspace corridor leading into the facility from the far side of the belt. They keep it hidden to avoid prying eyes. You'd need stealth tech, or a ship small enough not to trip their advanced scanners. Ethan glanced around the cramped cockpit. Their shuttle was certainly small, but stealth tech was another matter. We'll figure something out. Thanks, Orlo. I appreciate it. Don't mention it. And Ethan, be careful. The galaxy's getting darker these days, especially where the council's involved. The comm link cut, leaving the cockpit bathed in the dim glow of the console. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, sighing. He tapped the coordinates Orlo had provided into the NAV system, scanning for possible approach vectors. Beyond the standard star lanes, the path to Varus was riddled with hazards, ion storms, rogue asteroids, and pockets of lawless space patrolled by pirates. A faint shuffle behind him made him turn. Nyra stood, her sapphire skin reflecting the console's light. She wore an expression of quiet resolve. Ethan, I heard enough to know we're in danger, heading to a heavily guarded place. You need my help. Her tone was calm, each word carefully enunciated through the translator. He nodded. I won't lie, it's risky. But if we don't go, they'll keep doing whatever they're doing to your people and others. I can't stand by and let that happen. She placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch light, yet reassuring. Then we go together. The shuttle lurched unexpectedly, snapping their attention back to the controls. Ethan cursed as the engine readouts flared red. A chunk of cosmic debris had grazed the hull, compromising the right stabilizer. They needed a safe place to make repairs, or risk spinning into oblivion. Scanning local data, Ethan located a small planetoid orbiting a dim star, uninhabited, according to the charts. With quick maneuvering, he directed the shuttle downward, entering the planetoid's thin atmosphere. The battered craft shuddered violently upon descent, but Ethan wrestled the controls with grim determination, managing a hard landing on a flat expanse of blackened rock. They spent hours conducting makeshift repairs, patching the stabilizer with salvaged metal plates, and re-welding cracked sections of the hull. Nyra assisted as best she could, though her knowledge of mechanical systems was limited. Occasionally, she would pause to gaze at the planetoid's bleak horizon, jagged mountains of obsidian-like stone, illuminated by a faint glow from the distant star. Silence reigned, broken only by the hiss of the welding torch and their quiet breaths. During a break, they shared a ration pack. The translator caught their subdued conversation. I've always been a drifter, Ethan confessed, wiping sweat from his brow. Never had much to believe in, besides my next job. But this, with you, it feels like something bigger. Nyra studied him with compassionate eyes. Your kindness has already changed my life, Ethan. I hope we live long enough to see what becomes of this alliance. He nodded, heart pounding. In the harsh, otherworldly stillness of that planetoid, there was an uncanny sense of intimacy that words could not fully capture. They were two lost souls, united by circumstance, forging a bond neither had expected. When the shuttle was finally flight-worthy again, they took off, leaving the silent rock behind. The next leg of their voyage would lead them into the Varus sector's dangerous heart. With Orlo's subspace corridor in mind, Ethan entered the coordinates, feeling an undercurrent of dread. By now, the Council surely knew of their movements, or at least suspected their destination. Every second, The noose tightened. Yet, despite the swirling chaos beyond the hull, a faint optimism flickered between them. Perhaps it was hope, or the forging of an unspoken promise that, come what may, they would face it side by side. Chapter 6. Into the Lion's Den. Navigating the approach to Varus was harrowing beyond measure. The region was infamous for its asteroid clusters, which drifted unpredictably through gravitational eddies, colliding and breaking apart in silent, deadly fireworks. Every so often, Ethan had to pull hard on the controls to dodge a chunk of spinning rock the size of a battleship. "This is madness," he muttered through gritted teeth. Nyra, seated beside him, focused intently on the sensors, trying to anticipate debris patterns. They worked in silent synchronization, forging a synergy born of necessity. Eventually, they slipped into the subspace corridor Orlo had mentioned, a dark tunnel of swirling energy hidden between layers of normal space. The corridor's entrance was masked by anomalies that scrambled conventional scanners, making it virtually invisible to outsiders. Inside, waves of prismatic light swept the shuttle, and an eerie hush replaced the roar of engines. The subspace corridor was a phenomenon known only to a few smugglers and black market traders, an unstable shortcut that shaved days off normal travel time. However, the slightest miscalculation in trajectory could seal their fates, trapping them in the corridor's warped pocket dimensions. With trembling hands, Ethan held the shuttle on course, guided by the rudimentary data Orlo had provided. Nyra, sensing the tension, placed a reassuring hand on his arm. Gradually, the corridor deposited them near the outskirts of a dense asteroid belt. Beyond it, sensor scans revealed a small planetoid orbited by a heavily fortified station. This, undoubtedly, was the secret facility. Ethan killed the engines, allowing the shuttle to drift. He had to avoid detection for as long as possible. Nyra studied the facility on the readouts. A squat, circular structure set amidst an array of turrets and orbital defenses. The entire installation bristled with sensor arrays, capable of detecting unauthorized ships from considerable distances. "How do we get in?" she asked. Ethan rubbed his chin. "We can't storm it openly. Our best bet is to find a blind spot in their sensor coverage or slip in with authorized traffic. But it looks like they keep a tight perimeter." As if on cue, an incoming vessel appeared on the scanner, a large transport ship broadcasting Council credentials. It angled toward the facility's main docking port. Ethan watched intently. "They must be bringing new prisoners or resources," Nyra whispered, voice trembling with an undercurrent of anger. Ethan nodded. "If we hide behind one of these asteroids, we might slip in when the docking bay opens. But we'll need perfect timing. If they scan us, it's over." Nyra's expression hardened. "I'll be ready." They crept closer, weaving carefully among tumbling rocks, trying not to cause any sensor pings. The battered shuttle's power core hummed at minimal output, on the verge of a total shutdown. Ethan's eyes flickered between the external feed and the docking port. The massive transport aligned with the station, and docking clamps extended. Alarms sounded as the bay began to open. "Now," Ethan hissed, nudging the throttle. The shuttle emerged from behind a rotating asteroid, hugging the transport's far side to remain out of direct line of sight. The cargo ship was large enough to shield them from the station's sensor beams, at least momentarily. Heart pounding, Ethan deftly guided the shuttle toward a secondary bay door that began to slide shut after the transport was secured. With one final burst of thrusters, they slipped inside just as the doors sealed, plunging them into the facility's vacuum-locked interior. Seconds later, the docking clamps latched onto the shuttle automatically, hissing as the bay pressurized. Ethan and Nyra exchanged nervous looks. "We did it," she whispered. "But now the real danger starts." Stepping onto the station's deck felt like entering the maw of a beast. The hangar was vast, filled with row upon row of crates, stacked to the high ceiling. Automated drones zipped overhead, carrying supplies. Shadowy corridors branched out in multiple directions, each heavily monitored by surveillance devices. Ethan quickly spotted a dark corner near some idle cargo crates. They hurried over, ducking behind the stacked containers. The translator was set to a low volume as they strategized. "We need tangible evidence of what they're doing here. Then we can make a public broadcast or contact the right people," Ethan said. Nyra nodded. eyes shining with determination. They'll be holding captives somewhere, possibly my own people. They moved cautiously, hugging the walls. Once they exited the hangar, they found themselves in a wide corridor, lined with reinforced doors. Occasional patrols of guards strolled by, clad in black uniforms emblazoned with an insignia that Ethan recognized as belonging to an organization under the Council's jurisdiction. After a tense few minutes, they slipped into a side passage leading downward. The air became stale, carrying faint echoes of machinery and muffled voices. The deeper they went, the more ominous the surroundings. At last, they reached a set of secure doors with biometric scanners. Beyond the transparent panels, rows of cells extended into the darkness, reminiscent of the slave ship's prison bay. Through the glass, they caught glimpses of motion, blue-skinned individuals like Nyra, eyes hollow with despair, locked behind energy barriers. Some were unconscious, perhaps sedated. Others clung to the bars, bodies trembling as if weakened by experiments. The scene made Nyra's breath catch in her throat, rage mingling with heartbreak. "This is it," Ethan murmured. "We have to get them out." Nyra shook her head slowly. "Yes, but not without proof. We must expose them. Otherwise, they'll just rebuild in secret." Ethan glanced around, spotting a door labeled Operations. If there were logs, communication records, or data files, they would likely be in there. He pointed, and Nyra nodded. Together, they crept to the door. It was locked with an electronic keypad. Ethan made quick work of it using a slicer tool purchased on Bracken's Rest. The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a dimly lit control center filled with monitors and server racks. They stepped inside, hearts pounding. The translator remained silent, for fear of alerting any security measures. Quickly, they scanned the consoles. Screens showed the interior of each cell, along with medical readouts and laboratory logs. Ethan grimaced at a list labeled Specimen Transfer Reports. It detailed experiments on the captured Cyrathians, using their innate energy manipulation for testing advanced weapons. Page upon page of data scrolled by, culminating in a series of communications with high-ranking council officials, who gave explicit instructions to keep the project a secret. Ethan copied everything onto a storage device, his hands shaking. This was the proof they needed. The final piece was a log dated only a few days prior, referencing Nyra specifically, her power readings, her rebellious actions, and direct orders from members of the High Circle on Sirith. The heartbreak on Nyra's face was evident as she read the lines, confirming that her own council had sanctioned her exploitation. A muffled sound outside the operations room made them freeze. The heavy tread of boots approached. Shadows flickered beneath the door. An authoritative voice barked orders about intruders. Nyra's eyes flitted to Ethan. They were out of time. Desperation fueling their movements. They darted behind a row of server racks as the door hissed open. Two guards entered, scanning the room with rifles drawn. The glow of flickering monitors cast ominous shadows, revealing the tension etched on their faces. Ethan's pulse thundered, hands poised on his pistol. Nyra took a silent step forward, gesturing for him to wait. Summoning her energy, she focused, letting a faint aura shimmer around her fingertips. In one swift movement, she unleashed a pulse of disorienting light that crackled across the guards' helmets, short-circuiting their visor systems. They staggered, shouting in confusion as their heads rattled with the aftershock. Ethan seized the chance. He lunged forward, striking one guard in the jaw with the butt of his pistol. The other guard spun blindly, swinging his rifle in a wide arc. Nyra ducked beneath it and delivered a sharp blow to his side. The man collapsed to his knees, groaning. In moments, the room was silent again. Breathing hard, they retrieved the rifles, stashing them in a corner. Alarms would surely follow, but for now, they had a precious window. Ethan ejected the storage device from the console. It felt strangely warm to the touch, as though it contained the weight of 1,000 revelations. In Nyra's gaze, he saw a resolute fire that refused to be quenched. "Let's free your people," Ethan said softly. "Then we broadcast this data to every corner of the galaxy." Nyra nodded. "Yes, let them see what the Council truly is." Chapter 7. Liberation and New Horizons. Seizing the guards' keycards, they rushed to the cell block. Rows of imprisoned Cyrathians and other alien captives watched warily as Ethan and Nyra barreled in. Nyra raced to the nearest control panel, swiping the stolen card. Alarms blared the moment the system recognized unauthorized use, but the energy barriers flickered and died, freeing the captives from their glowing cells. A wave of confusion spread among the prisoners as they realized the barriers were down. Some stumbled forward, disbelieving. Others rushed to help fallen comrades too weak to move on their own. Nyra spoke soothingly in her native tongue to the Cyrathians, urging them to follow. She repeated key phrases in other languages via the translator, beckoning all captives to escape their grim confines. Ethan kept watch at the doorway, fending off the occasional guard who dared to investigate the disturbance. As the group of newly freed prisoners assembled, the corridor filled with their voices, some sobbing, others chanting words of gratitude or defiance. The scene was chaotic, but it was the chaos of liberation. Time was short. Security forces were surely mobilizing throughout the station. Ethan led the crowd toward the hangar, determined to reach their shuttle or any vessel capable of flight. When they emerged into the main corridor, a squad of heavily armed soldiers blocked their path. The tension in the air crackled. Before the soldiers could open fire, Nyra and several of her kin stepped forward in unison, their palms glowing with a shimmering azure brilliance. As one, they sent a wave of energetic force barreling down the corridor, disarming the soldiers and disabling their rifles. The squad staggered back, overwhelmed by the coordinated surge. The freed captives rushed forward, subduing the soldiers before they could recover. Ethan's heart raced. He had never witnessed collective energy manipulation on this scale, and it was both beautiful and terrifying. Their synergy, fueled by desperation and hope, was unstoppable. Pressing on, they reached the hangar. The alarm klaxons blared in protest, and the facility's main doors remained sealed. Automated turrets along the ceiling swiveled menacingly, targeting the group. Panic rippled through the freed captives. With no time for hesitation, Ethan sprinted to the hangar's control console, hunching low to avoid turret fire. He smashed the panel with a rifle butt, exposing a tangle of wires. Sparks flew as he worked frantically to override the locking mechanism. Behind him, Nyra and the other Cyrathians raised a shimmering shield of energy, blocking the turret blasts that rained down. Their faces contorted with strain, horns crackling as they diverted lethal plasma bolts. Screams echoed as stray shots scorched the floor, but no one faltered. At last, the console beeped, indicating the locks were disabled. The main doors groaned open, revealing the swirling blackness of space beyond. As decompression alarms hooped, the station's artificial gravity wavered. Ethan clung to the console, fighting against the rush of escaping air. "Get to the ships," he yelled over the roar, pointing to the battered shuttle and a larger cargo vessel near the far wall. Those who could run, ran. Others were half-carried, half-dragged by stronger inmates. The corridor's lights flickered ominously, hinting at the station's failing systems. Gripping the edge of a crate, Nyra shouted instructions to her people. "Help each other. We must leave before they seal the bay again." Some fled to the cargo vessel, while others crowded into Ethan's shuttle. The battered craft groaned under the weight of so many. As the last stragglers climbed aboard, a series of emergency seals began sliding over the bay doors, threatening to trap them all. Ethan scrambled inside his shuttle and fired the engines. The cargo vessel, piloted by a freed prisoner with experience, roared to life as well. With one thunderous thrust, both ships tore free of the docking clamps, jostling everyone inside. They soared out of the bay, weaving through the station's external defenses. Turrets on the station's surface spat beams of light, some scoring glancing hits on the escaping vessels. The cargo ship's shields flared under the onslaught, but it held. Ethan's shuttle, lacking robust defenses, danced in evasive maneuvers, narrowly avoiding a direct strike that would have pulverized them. Within minutes, they were out of immediate range, leaving the station behind. It loomed against the star-freckled void, an ugly monument to the Council's corruption. Ethan's pulse thundered. In the co-pilot's seat, Nyra exhaled in shaky relief, tears glimmering in her luminescent eyes. The translator device at her hip crackled, capturing her trembling words. "We did it. We freed them." Ethan nodded, face damp with sweat. "We have the data. Now everyone will know the truth." Cheers rose from the cramped cabin, where dozens of freed prisoners clung to whatever handholds they could find. The victory was euphoric, but they were not out of danger yet. The Council would undoubtedly dispatch pursuit ships, and the station staff would sound an alarm throughout the sector. But for now, they were free. As the cargo vessel flanked them, Ethan opened a comm channel. On the screen, he saw the pilot, a fellow Cyrathian with tired eyes, but a hopeful smile. They quickly coordinated coordinates for a remote star system where they could regroup. The plan was simple: broadcast the stolen data to every reputable news hub, activist group, and independent intelligence network. Once the truth spread, the Council would be forced to face the scandal, losing credibility, and perhaps more importantly, the ability to continue their vile operations in secret. Time blurred as they accelerated to faster-than-light speed. The freed captives rested wherever they could, sharing stories of their ordeal, occasionally breaking into tears of both sorrow and gratitude. Nyra moved among them, offering words of comfort in her soothing, melodic tone. She glowed with renewed vigor, as if freeing her kin had rekindled a spark deep within her soul. Finally, the tension of the day caught up with Ethan. He slumped back in the pilot's seat, letting the autopilot guide them. Nyra approached, kneeling beside him, her expression caught between exhaustion and relief. "You have given me more than freedom," she said softly, her luminous gaze meeting his. "You've given me hope. My people will remember what you did today." Ethan managed a weary grin. "I didn't do it alone. None of this would have happened without your courage, Nyra." She raised a slender hand, tracing the edges of his jaw with gentle curiosity. "I see now why some among us wish to reach out to humanity. There is good in you, in your kind, just as there is darkness, but you have shown me the light." Words failed him. Instead, he placed his hand atop hers, feeling the warmth of her sapphire skin. For a moment, the entire galaxy seemed to narrow to that single connection, two unlikely souls who had found each other in the darkness. They sat like that for a time, savoring the quiet. In the background, the engines hummed, carrying them away from the station that had once been a fortress of oppression. With the stolen data secured and the freed captives recovering, a sense of renewal settled over them all. Eventually, Nyra rose, pressing her forehead gently to Ethan's in a gesture of affection her people used. Then she turned to attend to her kin. Ethan watched her go, heart brimming with an emotion he could scarcely name. The battles ahead would be formidable: the Council, the conspirators on Sirith, the bounty hunters still lurking among the stars. Yet for now, at least, their story had found a moment of peace. And in that peace, they glimpsed the promise of something more, a future shaped not by betrayal or fear, but by the power of unity, courage, and a love that had blossomed against all odds. Days later, in a secluded sector far from prying eyes, the cargo vessel and Ethan's shuttle floated side by side. The liberated Cyrathians and other freed captives had organized, sharing food and resources. Makeshift medical bays and sleeping quarters dotted the cargo ship's vast hold. Though the future remained uncertain, for now, they stood together, forging a fellowship of survivors. Ethan, with assistance from a few tech-savvy prisoners, had transmitted the incriminating data across the galaxy. Word spread quickly: Galactic Council officials implicated in illegal experimentation and slavery operations. Outrage erupted on countless worlds. Protests sprang up, and high-ranking council members found themselves cornered by investigative tribunals. While some would surely attempt to cover up, the truth had been unleashed, and it was far too large to be contained. Amid the swirling news reports, a coded message reached Ethan's shuttle. It came from certain sympathetic leaders within the council itself, promising an internal purge of corrupt elements. Whether this was genuine or political posturing, time would tell. But it was a step forward. In the cargo ship's common area, the Cyrathians and others prepared to set out for new homes. A few were determined to return to Sirith, hopeful they could dismantle the corrupt High Circle from within and restore honor to their planet. Others decided to travel deeper into the galaxy, seeking to rebuild their lives far from the scars of captivity. For Nyra, the choice weighed heavily. She wished to see justice done on her homeworld, to heal the rifts that had caused such suffering. But each time her gaze fell upon Ethan, conflict stirred within her. She had grown attached to this steadfast human with kind eyes and a quick smile, who had risked everything to free her. The thought of parting from him filled her with a deep ache. Yet she also felt an obligation to her people. On the day before the group would disperse, Nyra found Ethan alone in the shuttle's cockpit, gazing at the distant stars. Softly, she approached. When he noticed her, he smiled, but a shadow of sadness crossed his features. "You're going back to Sirith, aren't you?" he asked quietly. She nodded, her eyes shimmering. "Yes, I must. My people need me. We must expose and uproot the traitors in our council. And they must see that alliances with the rest of the galaxy can be made honorably. We have much to offer and much to learn." Ethan cleared his throat, forcing steadiness into his voice. "Then this is goodbye?" Nyra reached for his hands, her sapphire skin warm against his. "Only for a time. Once my world is set right, I want to explore the stars, perhaps with you by my side. Will you wait for me?" Emotions welled up in Ethan's chest. He squeezed her hands gently. "I'll search for you among the stars, Nyra. You have my word." A tender moment passed, and she leaned forward, pressing her forehead to his once more. In that quiet, intimate gesture, they exchanged unspoken promises of devotion and hope. When she pulled back, her eyes sparkled with tears. As the next morning dawned, if one could call it morning in the vacuum of space, Nyra and a group of fellow Sarathians boarded a borrowed vessel, its engines humming with subdued power. They planned to travel discreetly to Sirith, prepared to face whatever awaited them there. Ethan joined the others in the hangar, watching as the vessel powered up. A hush fell over the crowd. Nyra stood at the airlock, meeting Ethan's gaze. No words were needed. They had faced death, exposed corruption, and freed the enslaved. They had found each other in the darkest corridors of a slave ship, forging a bond neither of them had ever anticipated. With a flash of thrusters, the Sarathian vessel vanished into the starry expanse. Ethan stood there for a long moment, surrounded by the hum of life and the echoes of departure. Though his heart felt an ache at Nyra's absence, it also brimmed with pride and gratitude. She was free, truly free, following the path that called to her. He turned to the handful of freed prisoners who had decided to remain with him. Together, they would continue the fight against oppression, helping refugees, sharing information, and working to keep the council accountable. Ethan stepped back into his shuttle, the battered hull that had become so much more than a simple craft. It was a symbol of defiance, of courage, of love found in unexpected places. Settling into the pilot's seat, he engaged the engines. The console lights glowed softly, reflecting off the well-worn controls. A faint smile tugged at his lips as he imagined Nyra on her homeworld, standing beneath the twin suns of Sirith, her sapphire skin shimmering with renewed purpose. One day, he told himself, he would see that sight with his own eyes. For now, a new journey beckoned, one of rebuilding, resisting tyranny, and forging alliances across the galaxy. And in that distant future, when the dust settled and the stars aligned, Ethan believed they would find their way back to each other, guided by a hope that soared beyond any horizon, burning brighter than any star. And so, their story ended, not in sorrow, but in promise, a promise that love and freedom, once kindled, would shine on, forever altering the fate of two worlds and the boundless tapestry of the cosmos itself.